Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight, we're going to be diving in to some real horrors, meeting some people who I'm sure you'd rather not meet, who prey on the young. It's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. When I was 9, I asked my dad for piano lessons. My dad was a professional musician, so he knew a pianist, and set up for me to start getting lessons. Scott was a good teacher, patient and compassionate. I learnt a lot. He was also a fun guy, and he would regularly have weekend bonfires and invite our family. So the adults could drink beer and play rock music, and the kids could roast marshmallows and run ourselves ragged on his property. My dad has 3 daughters, me the eldest, and was seeing a woman who also had 3 children. So every weekend there were 6 of us. Scott loved to play with us, and we thought he was the funnest guy for always taking time to hang out with us, all between about 5 and 12. He would let us dress up on him and pounce on him, and he loved to tickle us. You're seeing red flags go off now, but we didn't at the time. We liked that an adult thought we were fun. I have a cassette tape of us recording a fake news broadcast where he barges in for a tickle attack. I can't find a cassette player to listen to it, although I'm not sure if I want to. As I started to get a bit older, the oldest girl at 11 or 12, I started to notice Scott was showing me favoritism. He loved when I drew him pictures, liked having me on his lap, and when he took all the kids in turn a short ride around the block on his motorcycle, I got the longest ride. He took me all the way to a Target and bought me a dress that was way too short and showed off my legs. When we were sunbathing at a beach party once, I could feel him stare at me through his sunglasses. And here's the thing that creeps me out the most. Back then, I loved the attention. I was in constant competition with 5 other kids, the older rowdy teenage boys and the younger girls. I didn't cause any problems for my dad and his fiancée, so I didn't need any special attention. But Scott paid attention to me, and it made me feel mature and interesting. At some point, he and my dad drifted apart. The band got a new pianist, and we stopped going to his bonfires. I had already quit taking piano when I was 11, and started learning the clarinet instead. I didn't really think about it until a while after. Then one day, when I was 16, my dad called me and my sisters in for a family meeting. Scott was in jail. He had been arrested for having sex with a 12-year-old girl. He made her promise not to tell her parents, but she did. Dad said he had started to suspect that Scott wasn't someone he should have his family around when he brought me that short dress. Suddenly it all made sense. I didn't know how to feel. Nothing had happened to me, but he'd thought about it. Had I wanted him to think about me? Me, a 12-year-old girl desperate for adult approval. Was I actually surprised when I heard he'd been arrested? Now, as an adult, my sense of sexuality is pretty messed up, and I have little trust in people. I wonder what of this is related to him, if at all. Occasionally, I'm still devastated that someone I liked so much could have been thinking such evil things about me and my developing body. This happened about 6 to 7 years ago, in 2011 or 12, over the course of about 5 to 6 months. I never really got the courage to tell this story, and it haunts me. I was around 12 at the time, and of course lived with my parents. We had moved out of the city 2 years prior, and just settled in this little town. It was tranquil. We were in a really secluded area, and my closest neighbours were around 500 meters away, which for France, Brittany, is not uncommon. I was going to the local middle school about a 10-minute bus ride away, and between my house and the bus stop there's about 1 kilometer on foot of distance. Just know that to get to my house from the bus stop there are 4 roads. One was long and went by a dangerous road. Another was a tad shorter and creepy. The third was the longest way through the woods, and the fourth was the easiest and fastest way. I used to always use the fourth road, and then one day, as I was turning, there was someone I had never seen before. He was around 18 at the time, maybe older. He yelled at me and waited for me to turn, and followed me. And at some point, I just stopped and asked him to go away, as I wasn't sure he was a neighbor. He told me that he had been paid to sexually assault me, and that if I ever told this, he'd kill me and my family, showing me a big knife. Now, to 12 to 13-year-old me, it was really scary. I ran, went inside, locked all the doors, and waited until my parents returned at 6:30. It was during the first half of October, and every day since then I saw him waiting for me at that specific turn, so I just went the other roads to go home. It lasted a few months. At some point he'd find me, so I'd change paths. One day he attacked me. I ran for my life as he tried to stab me. I managed to get away, but I lost a bra and shirt. I told my parents on the first day it all happened and they didn't believe me. But after the attack we went to the police, and I learnt that I wasn't the only one who was attacked. He hadn't killed anyone, but he had sexually assaulted a few girls. He was mentally ill and was released 3 years ago from prison. I heard from another victim that had been attacked 2 years after me that he was thrown in jail, and I'm honestly relieved that it won't happen to anyone ever again. When I was 10 or 11, I got Skype, which was great because I got to see my friends when I couldn't hang out with them. One night I was on Skype with my friend, and her dad told her to give me his Skype. I didn't think anything of this because my parents never taught me about adults having bad intentions, and I also spent a lot of time at my mum's office with other adults. I felt normal and safe. I messaged this man who was about 40 years old and married at the time, and we talked a lot for a while. He would ask me things about my life, sort of easing his way into asking me the creepy stuff. He never let me video chat him, which I was always disappointed in. I never saw how creepy he could have been in many ways, even when he would ask me things about my relationship, and asked if I liked boys or girls. He even went as far as suggesting that he had a crush on me. He never outright said it though, but very heavily suggested it. At some point he just dropped all contact with me. I got kind of upset, but it didn't last because I had normal preteen things that girls do. The only time I got a bad feeling about him was when the guidance counselor at school asked me if I'd ever talked to him. I knew in my heart he would get in trouble if I said yes, but I didn't know why he would get in trouble. I told her he'd never spoken to me, and I later learnt he was under investigation for exploiting other young girls. I'm a junior, so this was either 10 or 11 years ago, back in either second or first grade, before I moved across the city I had lived in at the time, though I remained at the same school. So when I was a little kid in elementary school, I would always take the bus with my friend Addie. We aren't such close friends now and grew apart towards middle school, but we were good friends in elementary school, with her being the first person I ever met at school. Our bus driver seemed like a pretty friendly guy. I don't remember much more than a face, as most of the time on the bus I was prioritized with my dolls that I would occasionally carry around with me, or my friends, or with whatever else a kindergartner or first or second grader has to be preoccupied with. But the driver acted differently towards Addie than I, or anyone else for that matter. For our birthdays, he would sing happy birthday and get the other kids on the bus onto it. How he even knew our birthdays I'm not sure, but we were kids, and someone probably got excited and said something. He also always referred to Addie and I as princess. It wasn't like some people call every female they meet darling or sweetheart, or other terms of endearment or pet names. It was just us two, and maybe one or two others that he would say this to. We were little kids. We didn't see anything wrong in this being treated differently. We come to find out a couple of years later, when I was in middle school, that he'd actually been fired and arrested. My old bus driver was in prison for trying to keep a girl, one of the middle schoolers, from getting off the bus, and she'd had to yell out the window or call someone. I'm not sure of the details. Either way, he was in prison for trying to hold a girl against her will, and thinking back on how he treated my friend and I have no doubts he eventually tried something similar with us if he'd have gotten the chance. Not to mention that it was creepy in general to single out two young girls and treat them in that way. This happened when I was 10 to 11 years old. I grew up in a fairly rural area outside of Raleigh. It was the nearest big city to us, and it took roughly 35 to 40 minutes to get anywhere good. Needless to say, when I was right around that age, the town we were in built a new library. Coming from an avid reading family, we were thrilled. On average, my mum, an older sister, and I would take 1 to 2 trips weekly to the library. It held a fascination for all of us. My older sister Babs used to come pick out a few books and spend the rest of her time on the computer, printing off fan fiction and stuff related to her favorite fandom. I spent the majority of my time in the young adult section and went through about 3 to 4 books a week. We were homeschooled, and therefore spent a lot of time reading and doing other stuff once our schoolwork was finished. Mum would always spend her time in the romance and non-fiction sections and grab a big stack of books and pick which ones she wanted by reading the first few pages of each. We knew the librarians, a lot of the regulars, and were in a very safe rural town in North Carolina. No reason to be on alert. The layout of the library was entirely open. Imagine a large high school gymnasium that an architect built with 3 high-story roofs and tons of natural light, and you had our library. You walk in and the checkout is immediately to your left, the young adult section and kids in front of that. Straight ahead is the computer bank. Then to the right are all of the adult books, fiction and non-fiction. Then around the entire edge were small activity rooms and reading/study rooms. This particular day was like normal. Babs went to get her couple of books, and Mum off to her section, and me to mine. Now I used to just sit on the floor and go through the books one by one, reading the jacket, then the first few pages to see if it caught my fancy. Super annoying habit that I don't have anymore. I remember being camped out on the second aisle closest to the door for a while, and then feeling like I was being watched. Keep in mind, I was in the young adult section. I didn't pay too much attention to it until I decided I had gotten through enough books on the shelf, and I wanted to switch to the other side of the bookshelf. I stood up and walked to the other side, grabbed the couple of books I had chosen, and became aware of this dark-haired fellow at the end of the aisle, book in hand. Not reading, but just watching me. It was like he was staring past the book and watching me. I didn't pay it much mind and moved to the next aisle over. A few moments later he followed. I figured that he was probably another teen and was looking for books. So I kept sitting on the floor and reading book jackets until he got closer. It all happened very quickly. When one moment I was reading book jackets, and then he moved to the same aisle as me. I brushed it off. I almost had enough books at that point to make it for my next library visit. Keep in mind, we had super old dial-up, and 1 computer for 5 people in our house. My little sister was in daycare that day, and books were my joy and only entertainment, so I was very serious about reading. I guess I lost track of time, and when I looked up, he was still watching me. At that point, I got creeped out and had goosebumps. So what did 11-year-old me do? Try to find my big sister, of course. I tried to casually get up with my stack of books and exit the aisle. I had to pass by him to get to where the computers were. I tried to pretend I was interested in the top book on the stack. However, I caught his eye. That's when I realized he was probably in his late 20s or early 30s, and should not be in the young adult section of a library. I tried to find Babs, because she should have been where I left her at the computers. But lo and behold, she was not where I left her. This is pre us having cell phones. No one in the family had one except for Dad for work. So then I start to panic, because when I turned back to the young adults section, the dude was still there clocking me. I scan around and don't see my mother anywhere. I kept walking to the grown-up section and scanned down the aisles until I found my mum sitting in a corner in an armchair, reading. I beelined for her. Now my mum is probably the coolest cucumber on the planet. When my dad passed away, she called me and let me know he was in the ambulance and was not alive, but that I needed to come to the hospital. She also has never overreacted to anything in life before. Here comes severely panic-attacked me, trying to play it cool. I sat down at her feet and explained what transpired. She figured it was my overactive imagination and told me to stay close. Then, we talked about my book, or if we should go to Walmart or not this trip. Maybe Waffle House for lunch sounded better, or the Mexican restaurant in the shopping center Walmart was in. I was also very excited to get my Barbie a new set of dresses, because I had just received my allowance. We decided we would just get groceries at Walmart and eat at home. Now, whenever we did our library run, we would also hit Walmart for groceries and normal house supplies and the occasional toy. My grandparents used to give us an allowance every month for fun stuff. Mum and I were led back to the young adult section, and the guy was gone. Now, while she is calm, she isn't stupid. We found Babs sitting nearby to where we left her. Turns out she had been in the bathroom when I tried finding her. My mum explained what happened, and being much older than me, as she was closer to 20 at the time, she said it was creepy. But she didn't want to go to Walmart with us, so Mum and I should pick her up on our way back. She did give me a squeeze of the hand and a kiss on my cheek for comfort when I sat with her, so that was nice, and it made me feel safe. Mum then agreed. She and I checked out, got in the car, and went the 0.5 miles to Walmart. Now, I'm not saying this is safe, but it was a different time. I was a free spirit, and I roamed and my mother let me. I quickly forgot about the creepy guy once we got to Walmart, and got excited about spending some of the money allowance I had. A new outfit for my Barbies. The way our Walmart was set up, the toiletries and bath towels were across from the toys, so Mum was nearby getting shampoo and the like. She let me roam into the Barbie and doll aisle, which was very close. I turned the corner to the Barbies, and wham, there is the same dude from the library, standing next to the Barbie clothes. I froze. I basically was having a flip out before I realized I had to leave. He took several fast steps towards me and started to ask me if I liked Barbies, and I didn't say anything, but got really interested in something at the end of the aisle. I then, a few moments later, slunk away to find Mum and bolted. I ran and found her and explained he was here at Walmart. She left her cart. I followed. She moved so fast, she caught him at the end of the girls' toy aisle and asked if he liked messing with little girls, and that if he didn't stop, she was calling the police on her phone, and held her hand over her pocket. Keep in mind we didn't have cell phones, but she had a beeper, so she clutched it in her pocket like a cell phone. The dude and her almost had a standoff before he finally held his hand up and got himself out. Now, my mum has never in my life left a cart at a store, but she left that cart, and she and I ran to our car, the dude nowhere to be seen, and drove to get Babs at the library. We didn't stop anywhere, but we got to our neighborhood, and my dad was working 5 states away on a contract, so we went to my landlord's house and told him what happened, and stayed there until he could go check out our trailer and the surrounding property, because we figured if this dude followed us to Walmart, he might follow us home. Nothing happened, but I sure as hell didn't read those books that week I got them. I had forgotten about this until recently. So dude who was stalking an 11-year-old, let's not meet again. The following experience happened to me over the course of 1999 to 2000. I was 13. My dad had taken up a new hobby, local auctions. We lived in the sticks of South Central Pennsylvania. The Mason-Dixie line was almost my backyard. The spattering of towns around us we lived in were very small, mostly just huge expanses of farmland, cornfields, and lots of general run-down old barns. There were 2 major auctions locally, Stoner's auction on Sunday and Weller's auction on Tuesday evenings. I was going through puberty kind of early, and was very angsty and emotionally dramatic. The previous year I'd had my first boyfriend, but his parents didn't approve of the relationship and forbade us from seeing each other. Somehow it worked. The only tie I had with him was that my dad had told me he spotted him at Wheelie's one Tuesday night, when I wasn't there. From then on, I never missed Wheelie's. I always held out hope I'd see him again, but sadly never did. As a teenager, I always had a notebook and a pen on me, and I would go places just to write in my journal, not paying attention to anything around me. This habit eventually led to me getting kicked out of our church's youth group, but that's another story for another time. Many of the nights, Dad and I would go to Whirlies. My younger sister would come along, and would run around and play, sometimes going a little too far off from the crowds. She remembers this particular individual that I am about to describe too. One night, I noticed an elderly man with very deep, caring eyes. I can still picture his face so clearly. He smiled and winked at me, and I guess in my hormonal confusion, I felt a bit of thrill at the attention, and maybe the second time, possibly the third time. But one night, I felt someone brush my arse, more than just what you'd expect from someone walking by in close quarters behind you. More of an open-handed slide across my butt. I remember I was wearing this ridiculous biking outfit that I had bought in Walmart. It was silky, and I was getting a lot of compliments from the boys when I wore it. The feeling of that hand totally sliding across the silky fabric of my pants stands out so clearly in my memory. Another night, I was sitting there writing in my notebook, and he walked by and nudged my pen. It made me mess up what I was writing and look up. He winked at me. There was this really sad look of longing in his eyes. I still felt like this was just some weird old guy, no one to be afraid of. There were so many weird old men at this place, as long as I stayed near to my dad. But when he showed up at the other auction, Stoner's on Sunday, I was a little shaken. I wanted to say a little time had passed. I remember I was all fancied up in my awkward glitter makeup and rebellious outfit, and I was sitting there writing in my journal next to my little sister, when I felt a little tap on my shoulder. I turned around, and he was there, sitting right behind me. There was an expanse of open seats, and it was very clear he didn't just happen to be sitting there. He had definitely come over to talk to me. "How can I get to know you better?" he said in a controlled, barely audible voice. At this point, I'm almost positive that I said, "Well, I don't think what you want to know. I'm only 13 years old." Looking back, that makes sense, because after waiting a little while and saying it again, I ignore him, and he left. Maybe my saying that aloud was enough to make him feel like others might take notice. It really scares me to think about my little sister sitting beside me hearing all of this. She had absolutely zero awareness of keeping herself away from strangers, and I told her not to go to the bathroom or anywhere without me that day. That might have been the day he told me his name, Wilma. I saw Wilma one more time. It was a Tuesday night. It was in the late summer and was so hot. The auction was packed. My dad had to park his car way off the main area, sort of up in a wooded spot on the property. It was not directly visible to the auction goers. So me, being an annoyed brat after begging to go with him, I asked my dad if I could go up to the car. I wanted to listen to my Walkman and drink my Mountain Dew and write. It wasn't as hot as where the car was, and my dad gave me the keys. I saw Wilma one more time. It was a Tuesday night. It was in the late summer and was so hot. The auction was very packed. My dad had to park the car way off in the main area, sort of up in a wooded spot on the property. It was not directly visible to the auction goers. So me, being an annoyed brat after begging to go with him, I asked my dad if I could go up to the car. I wanted to listen to my Walkman and drink my Mountain Dew and write. It wasn't as hot where the car was. My dad gave me the keys. I must have asked him when he was in the middle of bidding on something, because I did not know if he would allow me to do this if he thought about it for 1 second. I had kept him informed about Wilma, you see. I remember sitting in the 1998 Oldsmobile Cutlass Sierra with the windows rolled all the way down. I hadn't seen Wilma in the crowd, so I wasn't concerned about safety. Suddenly, I heard knocking through the music of my headphones. I pulled them off quickly, and Wilma was standing right at the window on the driver's side, sticking his head out the window. "Hot enough for you?" he said, not worried about controlling his voice as no one was near. I did what made the most sense, almost on autopilot. I got out of the car as fast as I could. I stood there and yelled, "Why do you keep following me?" I'm sure my voice was loud enough that someone could have easily heard. He was immediately unnerved. "What do you mean, follow you? I've been coming to these auctions for years," he said, his voice suddenly back to the quiet monotone. I could not believe he had literally leaned his upper body into the car, and despite being very naive, I knew this was completely inappropriate. I said in a loud voice, "Listen, you're making me very uncomfortable, sir. I'm going to get my dad." I didn't move, but I had my dad's huge keyring in my hand. I briefly considered worst-case scenarios and stuck my middle finger into the ring. I could maybe hit him as hard as I could with the keys in my fist. This man then started running, not walking at a brisk pace like most elderly men do. I mean running down the little embankment. I went to get my dad and pulled him aside to tell him what happened. He told me he'd take care of it, and started looking through the crowd for Wilma. He was gone. That night I cried and panicked all night long, terrified every time the phone rang or that there was a noise outside the house. I figured if he wanted to, he could find where I lived, and I stopped going to the auctions, and my dad says he never saw Wilma after that night. He wasn't lying either, when he said he had been going to those auctions for years. It was odd that he stopped going to both of them so abruptly, but then again, not. Back around 6 or 7 years ago, my mum had a boyfriend. My parents were divorced. His name was Dave. He was really chill and brought me graphic t-shirts and toys, but we never bonded to the point where I would consider him a good friend of mine. I only saw him a few times a week, and only when he was with my mum. Long story short, Dave and my mum didn't last more than a few months, and Dave and I didn't stay in contact. When I asked my mum why they weren't together anymore, she then told me that Dave was too crazy for her. It would be a few weeks later that I would realize just how crazy this guy was. I remember distinctly that Dave would show up to my house uninvited on multiple occasions, bringing my mum gifts and begging her to take him back. Every time he did this, he was shooed off our property. But it didn't stop there. Dave started showing up at my mum's work, mailing things to us, and being even more of a general creep. This went on for some weeks until eventually, one way or another, it stopped. About a year ago, my mum told me some information that she wanted to withhold from me when I was younger. After being silent for a while, Dave had found out information about my dad, where he worked and his name, and gave the company a call. But unfortunately, it was my dad who answered him. Dave's call was unexpected, as my dad knew nothing about this man who claimed to be my mother's boyfriend, even after they'd broken up. He asked my dad for information about me, like where I was currently and if I was busy. When my dad asked why, Dave said he wanted to take me to the amusement park, just me and him. Thankfully, my dad found it sketchy and hung up, and told my mum about it. Being my mother, she was shocked and terrified someone who had been practically stalking us had tried to weasel his way through my family to take me somewhere fun. To this day, I still don't know what his real intentions were with me, and I don't like to think about it, as it really creeps me out. I was naive, sheltered, and only 14. So one day I went on this chat site, because I remember I was having a hard time falling asleep, and it was like really late into the night. I thought talking to some strangers might help me drowse off. Anyway, I was on there for maybe 15 minutes when I got a PM. I remember his name to this day. It was like Loving Dad or Lovely Dad, something like that. He introduces himself and says, "Hi," and asks for my information. I tell him my real age and my last name, and I remember we were talking about Disney movies. Nothing creepy, and he was funny. So I felt like maybe he was a good guy, but I was so wrong. So we ended up innocently talking for about an hour. Never did I think to ask him his age. I don't think I even really cared. But I was finally getting sleepy and told him I had to go to bed. But he really wanted to stay in contact with me, and I didn't see why not. After all, we'd spent an entire hour just talking about movies, and he knew a great deal about them, so I thought he was my age. I gave him my Skype, and for the next week we continued chatting. We both cammed, and then I saw how old he was. He told me he was 30, but I didn't think much of it. A little weird, but I never thought it was inappropriate. And he wasn't an ugly guy, and I was 14, and thought I was being an adult by talking to this older, more mature man. But then it got weird. I remember I went on vacation for a few days, and when I got back and started talking to him again, the conversation would lead to more sexual topics. He would say something like, "You have such red lips. I would love to kiss them." I didn't know how to react, so I just giggled. But then he started to ask me if I would call him Dad. I told him something stupid like, "I already have a dad." And he would say things like, "But I would love you more." So at that point, red flags started to pop up. After that eerie comment, I told him I was getting sleepy. I logged off, and the next morning, I deleted him. When I was 12, my mum took my cousin, who was 1 year younger than I, and my best friend at the time, and I, shopping at a Walmart during the Christmas season. A little background. I was mature for my age, and frequently went places alone, like the movies or the mall, or wandered around the stores alone while my mum shopped, and had never had any issues before. So we all walked into the store, and us girls made a beeline for the holiday section while my mum did her shopping. They had this huge man-sized Santa and snowman figures that could dance and sing carols on display for sale. Well, someone before us had moved the figures so they faced each other. When they sang and danced, their stomachs and pelvises smacked into each other. A dumb prank. They were turning on as we walked up, and I just remember standing there staring at these two stupid huge things singing and humping. As we watched, I heard a deep voice giggle and say, "Pretty funny, huh? Did you like watching that?" My cousin and I side-eyed each other and just stood there unsure of what to do. I knew he was being gross, but I was very young and still didn't know the specifics of sex yet. It ended and he asked, "Do you want to watch it again?" I said no, grabbed her hand, and we left the section, and he didn't follow, or so I thought. We ended up in the toy section looking at Barbies. I felt someone looking at me, so I glanced up at the creepy man from the Christmas department at the end of the aisle staring at us. Suddenly he's walking towards me, and I remember my body going cold, and I grabbed my cousin's hand. "Come on, we have to go," I said, yanking her arm hard. She was completely oblivious to the guy and said, "No," while stomping her foot down. I dug my nails into her arm and she finally looked up and saw him coming towards us and let me pull her away. The creepy guy followed us out at the aisle. As we were walking away, he said, "Little bitch," to me, and his face was very angry. We ran through the store until we reached my mum, and I remember she was in the craft department. I think we told her we saw a creepy guy, but not that he had followed us around or yelled at us. To this day, I don't know why I downplayed it to her. Maybe for fear that I would lose some freedom. I hope to not meet that Christmas pervert again. I used to go to church. Well, I still do. Just rarely now that I've seen more opinions and all of that. Some background. I have cerebral palsy that limits my motor functions, and it messes up my leg muscles. I've been through 2 surgeries, so I know how odd it feels to be pitied. I can walk just fine, with and without AFOs. Anyway, I went to a church with my dad, my stepmom, my sister, and my older stepsister. I call it Church of the Corn because I don't want to bring the rest of the church down for this isolated incident by calling it its real name. To say that they were enthusiastic about worship was kind of an understatement, but that's not the point. The point is that the youth pastor and my sister didn't really get along while I got along with him. I wouldn't say that we were friends, but one of the things he did still makes me actively stay away from people in the church during service to this day. One night, when it was just me and my sister, we just hang out with our church friends. Some of them are still part of this new youth group that's much more bearable and less getting traumatized by seeing the scene in the Passion of Jesus getting nailed to the cross. Cut to me, sitting in the front row with my friends being reserved and quiet, because I didn't like to talk much in service, even though I used to think at the time about how bullshit this all was. Now I was zoning out, and he was talking about the usual stuff you hear in an evangelical church, when all of a sudden, I feel his hand on my knee. "I want this boy to run, jump, and walk," the youth pastor said. It took my mind a second to register what was going on. I'm usually a physical person. I love hugs and being hugged, handshakes and other physical displays of affection. But I didn't really trust this guy. I froze as he continued, and I felt like he was using me further in his agenda. After service, I ran immediately to my sister, who saw it all, and decided to do this, and I love her for it. She had me do some jumps and run around, and that made me feel good. I ran around the sanctuary and soon forgot the uncomfortable feeling. Every time I see him, I never feel good, and I was out of there shortly after. I am a journalist, and was told this doozy by a woman I interviewed for a true crime story. When this woman was a young girl, let's say 8, she started to come down the stairs at night to tell her father there was a man in her closet. He tells her there's no such thing as the bogeyman, and sends her back to bed. This happens on and off for a week. Finally, he gets frustrated and walks into her room and says, "I'll show you there's nothing in your closet." As he goes to open the door, it opens an inch and then he feels someone slam it shut. Turns out, there really was a man in her closet. This guy was a perv who would come into the house every night and stare at the girl from the closet while she slept. The dad kicked the shit out of him, and the perv went to prison for many years. I researched her story 20 years after this happened. The guy had just gotten out of jail, and no one could find him. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope the audio quality today was good enough. I usually record during Pandora's nap time, but today I have to record a little bit earlier, because during her nap time I have to go to the Hyundai dealership to sort out this mess with the damaged car. Which is fun. It's 3 hours of sitting there, which gives me time to edit, I suppose, so it's not that bad. But then they tell me how much it's going to cost and see if the insurance is going to pay and all the like. So that's fun, impending doom. Anyway, Pandora has been throwing her blocks around and smashing things. I tried to edit all of these out as best I could. I hope that you guys didn't notice and hopefully you're like, oh, didn't hear anything. But I'm sure if you're listening super carefully with your headphones, you might have picked up a few bits, as it's almost impossible to edit it all out. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video, please do not forget to drop a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. That always helps me out a bunch. And if you're new here, please subscribe and press the little bell icon because, you know, you'd like to get notified. There's also a new service, a new thing that's come out called notify.me. It's actually amazing. What it means is that when you sign up on it, you link your YouTube account and then it will always notify you whenever people post, and you can connect. How does it work? You connect, like you download the app and then it will just notify you, but you choose how to be notified. So for example, if you subscribe to me on notify.me, oh look, you can hear Pandora now. If you subscribe to me on notify.me, it will just tell you every time I publish a video. And yeah, that's what it will do. The app still hasn't been released yet. It's just something that I'm going to let you know about, and I'll let you know when it's officially released. But if this is something that you think interests you, because you think, oh, I would really like to know every time this person, maybe not even me, but other people post, that's something awesome you can do. It's called notify.me. I'll let you know when the mobile app is released. It's currently only out on the computer. Anyway, for now, guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.